Have you ever felt that ache in your chest? The kind that comes when you've poured yourself into someone, only to be met with silence. It's a quiet kind of pain, the type that doesn't scream, but lingers. You give him your warmth, your softness, your time. You offer laughter, presence, and patience, thinking if you just stay kind enough, strong enough, loving enough, he'll see you. But somehow, the more you give, the more he drifts. He doesn't say it, but you feel it. That subtle distancing, that half-hearted attention. You go over it 100 times, wondering if it was something you did, or worse, something you lacked. We're taught that love means giving, that the more we offer, the deeper the connection should become. But what no one tells us is how the human ego, especially the masculine one, responds not to excess, but to absence. It's a strange paradox. When someone has too much of you too easily, they begin to believe they never had to earn you. And once they believe that, something inside them switches off, not because you are less valuable, but because their ego no longer feels the thrill of pursuit. And oh, how deeply the male ego thrives on that chase. It's not a matter of being manipulative. It's about recognizing a psychological rhythm that's been dancing quietly behind the scenes. You see, the male ego isn't just about pride. It's about a deep, unspoken need to feel significant, to feel chosen, but not by someone too available. Chosen by someone whose attention feels earned. That's what makes the difference. When your presence becomes expected, not cherished, he stops leaning in. He starts assuming. And when he starts assuming, he stops appreciating. I used to think love meant showing up no matter what, answering texts right away, reassuring every doubt, fixing things when they felt distant. But in doing all that, I slowly vanished. Not in his eyes, maybe, but in mine. I began reacting, not choosing. I began explaining instead of expressing. It wasn't love anymore. It was proving, convincing, hoping. And that's not connection. It's submission, dressed in affection. Carl Jung once said that what we resist persists. And I think that's true, especially in the realm of relationships. When we resist discomfort, we chase comfort, even when that comfort comes from someone who no longer sees us clearly. We keep feeding their need for validation, believing it will bring them closer. But the more we give from a place of emptiness, the more we reinforce the illusion that we are somehow less valuable. What no one told me is that you can't convince someone to value you by giving more. You can only show them your worth by giving less. But more precisely, by giving differently. With intention, with boundaries, with the quiet power of someone who knows they are the prize. And that changes everything. Because here's what happens when you stop reacting. When you stop explaining your feelings to someone who only listens when it suits them. When you stop showing up for someone who only responds to your presence, not your soul. Suddenly, the dynamic shifts. Not because you've played a game, but because you've reclaimed your rhythm. You've stepped out of their emotional orbit and returned to your own. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. You stop dancing to their music and start composing your own. And in that silence, your strategic, dignified silence, they begin to notice the echo of your absence. The comfort they once took for granted is no longer there. The emotional mirror they used to check themselves in is gone. And that space, your absence, speaks louder than any love letter you could have ever written. You see, the ego hates unpredictability. It thrives on patterns. When you become unpredictable, not erratic, but gracefully inconsistent, you awaken curiosity. You spark the unknown, and nothing stirs desire like uncertainty. That is not manipulation. That is nature. That is the very psychology of desire itself. The moment someone can no longer predict your reaction, they begin to question their own power over you. And that's when the ego trembles. There's something hauntingly powerful about a woman who doesn't chase, not because she's indifferent, but because she chooses peace over pursuit. She doesn't play hard to get, she just is hard to forget, because she's rooted in something real. She no longer performs to keep someone's attention. She becomes someone whose silence demands it. I used to be terrified of silence. It felt like rejection, like failure. But now I see that silence can be sacred. When used with intention, it becomes a language of its own. When someone expects you to explain, and you don't. When they expect you to beg, and you disappear. That is when their ego is no longer being fed, and something deeper is being starved. Control. There's a boy in every man, Jung might say. A boy who learned early on that attention meant power, that validation meant control. And when you take that away, not angrily, not vengefully, but silently, calmly, and with dignity, you disturb his inner world. He may not show it. He may pretend he doesn't care, but inside there is restlessness, a confusion, a craving. Because now he doesn't know where he stands. And that's the thing about control. When someone is used to having it, the moment they lose it, they don't think about anything else. You become a puzzle unsolved, a rhythm they can no longer follow, a silence that echoes louder than any desperate word you ever spoke. You become the question that interrupts his sleep and lingers in the spaces he thought he owned. But none of this works, not a single part of it, if you don't first come home to yourself. You cannot fake detachment. You cannot pretend to be indifferent while still checking your phone every 10 minutes. That energy is felt. The ego, as fragile as it is also sharp. It knows the difference between real distance and a cry for attention. That's why this journey begins not with him, but with you. You have to stop needing him to need you. You have to break the pattern where your worth is measured by someone else's gaze. You have to become the woman who no longer needs to be seen because she already sees herself. And that takes time. That takes healing. That takes the uncomfortable work of sitting in your own silence, not his. It's not about playing cold. It's about becoming whole. And when you do that, when you shift your focus inward, when you invest in yourself, not as a strategy, but as a sacred duty, everything changes. You walk differently, speak differently, react differently. And suddenly, the man who once took you for granted begins to feel that loss, not of a girlfriend or a lover, but of something deeper. A mirror, a muse, a woman whose presence made him feel powerful and whose absence makes him feel weak. And maybe that's the hardest part to accept, that what once felt like love was often just ego, dressed in affection. That his craving for you wasn't always about you, it was about how he felt around you. Powerful, desired, important. And when you take that away, you don't just remove yourself, you remove the story he told himself about who he was with you. And that, my dear, is the real heartbreak.
It's a strange thing, isn't it? How someone can crave your light, not because they want to bask in it with you, but because they want to be the source of it. He didn't fall for your heart. He fell for the way it made him feel about himself. And once he believed he had it, that it was his by default, the thrill dimmed. He stopped reaching, stopped wondering, stopped noticing the way your eyes lit up when you talked or the quiet strength it took for you to keep showing up. It wasn't that you changed. It was that he stopped looking. And yet, You kept hoping. Quietly. Patiently. You excused the distance, softened your edges, overcompensated. Maybe if you gave him more space, he'd come closer. Maybe if you were more understanding, he'd finally open up. Maybe if you stayed available, even when it hurt, he'd see how good you are, that he could trust you, that you were safe. But he didn't want safety, not in the way you thought. He wanted challenge, not confrontation, but that flicker of uncertainty, that whisper that you might not always be there. Because to a mind like his, safety is only exciting when it's almost out of reach. And that's the part that's hard to swallow. That no matter how deep your love is, it doesn't matter if his ego already feels full. The ego doesn't long for what it thinks it owns. It only chases what feels like it could slip away. So, here's where the pattern begins. He pulls back. Emotionally. Physically. Maybe it's subtle. A delayed reply. A vague excuse. A sudden busyness. And you feel it like a chill in the air. You lean in. Try to rewarm the space between you. You explain. You soothe. You try to close the distance with softness, but each step you take toward him feels like a step he takes away from you. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you grip, the faster it slips through. Because what you're really doing is feeding something that can never be full. This is the wound we don't talk about. The invisible ache of overgiving. Of waiting in silence for someone to appreciate what you've given them freely. And worse, of hoping that if you just wait long enough, he'll return with gratitude. But that moment rarely comes. Not because you aren't worthy, but because he's never had to wonder if yours to lose. There's an almost primal shift that happens when a man starts to feel that he might no longer have emotional control. Not because you slammed the door, not because you gave an ultimatum, but because you quietly stopped responding. You stopped chasing. You let the space remain empty without rushing in to fill it. And in that space, he begins to spiral. He won't show it, not at first, but the signs are there. The test messages, the half-hearted attempts to provoke a response. A breadcrumb trail of contact, just enough to see if you'll follow. But you don't. Not because you're playing a game, but because you finally learned the value of your own silence. It's not silence meant to punish. It's silence meant to protect. You've realized that not every message deserves a reply. That your time, your energy, your heart, they're not bargaining chips. They're sacred offerings, and no one gets them by default anymore. This is where you begin to feel the shift, not just in him, but in you. You start to notice how peaceful it is when you're not bracing yourself for crumbs, how full your day feels when it's not spent waiting for someone else's validation. You look in the mirror, and slowly your eyes come back to life. Not because he came back, but because you did. You begin to walk differently. Your steps are quieter, but more certain. You speak less, but everything you say holds weight. You don't explain yourself anymore. You don't need to. He might not understand what's changed. He may still send mixed signals, hoping to lure you back into the pattern, but you don't bite. Not out of spite, but because you finally see that being chosen means nothing if you had to shrink to fit inside someone else's comfort. And this is when the obsession begins. It doesn't come when you cry. It doesn't come when you beg. It doesn't come when you prove, it comes when you disappear. Not physically, but energetically. When your energy no longer leans toward him, when your heart no longer bleeds itself dry in hopes of being seen, he starts to feel the weight of what he's lost. Not the woman who begged for him, but the woman who stopped needing him. The one who now seems untouchable, unshaken. The one who no longer reacts, and it drives him mad. Because the ego can handle rejection, it can handle anger. But what it cannot handle is indifference. It cannot bear the realization that you no longer seek its approval, that you are no longer sitting in the front row of his performance, clapping for the smallest gestures, that you now exist outside his reach, in a place he cannot predict or control. And that's the moment he begins to feel you in the spaces he once ignored, in the silence after the joke when he hopes for your laughter, in the morning light when he checks his phone and your name isn't there, in the crowded room when he's surrounded by everyone but feels connected to no one. Because the mirror that once reflected his significance is gone. And without it, he has to face himself. Not the self you saw, but the one he tried to hide. Behind charm, power, control. And maybe that's the deeper truth behind this whole dance. That it was never about love, not at first. It was about ego. About the comfort of being wanted, the high of being needed. And when that high disappears, he begins to crave it again. Not because he loves you, but because he misses the way he felt when he believed he was everything to you. But now he isn't. And that's where your power lives, in not needing to prove anything anymore, in knowing that your silence says more than any explanation, in realizing that obsession isn't created by clinging, it's created by contrast, by being there, then not, by offering warmth, then walking away, by showing that your presence is a gift, not a given. It's not a role you play. It's not an act. It's a truth you grow into, slowly, quietly, fully. And once you step into it, you realize that the goal was never to make anyone obsessed. The goal was to become so whole within yourself that their obsession is irrelevant. That even if they come back, even if they beg, you no longer need to be the one waiting. Because you've remembered who you are.
There's a strange tenderness in reclaiming yourself. It doesn't always come with fireworks or grand awakenings. Sometimes it arrives in quiet ways, like the moment you realize you haven't checked your phone in hours and your chest feels light instead of anxious. Or when you walk past the mirror and for the first time in weeks, you see someone you admire staring back. Not because someone else has finally loved you the right way, but because you've stopped waiting for that love to validate your existence. That's when you know the spell is broken. And maybe that's what no one warns you about. The ache that lingers, even when you've done everything right. The part of you that still misses him even as you rise. The flickers of memory that still soften your resolve on quiet nights. But this time, you don't answer those feelings with action. You don't reach out. You don't explain. You don't slip back into the comfort of old roles. You simply let those emotions move through you like wind through open windows. No resistance, no rush, just presence. Because you know now, missing someone doesn't mean they deserve a place in your life again. You've seen too clearly what happens when you make someone the center of your gravity. How easy it is to orbit around their moods, their attention, their affection. How quickly you disappear when you forget that you are a universe of your own. But that was then. Now, you live differently. You speak to yourself with more kindness. You no longer apologize for your boundaries. You let the phone ring if you're not in the mood to be available. You take your time to reply. You protect your energy like it's gold, because it is. And slowly, you become the woman he cannot forget. Not because you were the most agreeable, not because you offered the most love, but because you were the one who stopped handing your power over, the one who didn't need him to define her worth, the one who walked away, not with bitterness, but with a grace so unfamiliar it startled him. That's the kind of loss that haunts a man, not the dramatic exit, but the quiet one, the one where you simply stopped showing up in the places he assumed you'd always be. And now he starts to reach. Maybe he won't say it outright. Maybe he'll test the waters first, a casual message, a photo reaction, a comment on something he never cared about before, just enough to check if the door is still slightly open. But you've changed. You're not angry. You're just not there in the same way anymore. And that's what disorients him the most. He thought he had time. He thought your loyalty was endless. He thought he could always circle back and find you waiting. But now he doesn't know. And the uncertainty unravels him, not because you punished him, but because your stillness, your silence, your soft withdrawal, it all feels foreign. He doesn't understand why you didn't try harder, why you didn't fight for the connection the way you used to. But that's the thing. You did fight. You just stopped bleeding for a battle that was never yours to win alone. You've started writing a new story, one where your joy isn't dependent on anyone else's recognition, one where your days feel full because they're filled with your presence, your rituals, your growth. You walk differently now, not hurried, not hopeful for someone else's arrival, but steady, rooted, whole. And when he sees you again, whether in passing, in pictures, or from a distance, something in him will shift. Not because of what you say, but because of what you no longer need to say. You've become a mirror he can't control anymore. And that realization bruises the ego in ways no words ever could. Because in his story, he was the one with the power. He was the one who decided when it started, when it paused, when it resumed. But now, the script has flipped. You are no longer participating in that old performance. You're writing your own lines, and he doesn't know his role anymore. That's when the obsession takes root. It doesn't look like begging or confessing right away. It begins in silence, in his thoughts, in the what-ifs that echo through him when he's alone. It builds in the quiet moments, when he's laughing with friends but your absence pulses underneath. When he meets someone new, but the connection feels flat because it's not you. When he rereads your last words and realizes they weren't pleas, but closures, that you weren't pausing, you were ending. And maybe he won't say any of this. Maybe he'll pretend he's unbothered, that life is good. But the ego has its own language, and in that language, your silence is a roar. Carl Jung often spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, suppress, or refuse to acknowledge. And in moments like these, your absence becomes his mirror, not just of the love he lost, but of the part of himself he refused to face, the part that always needed to be worshipped to feel alive, the part that used affection as control, the part that never learned how to stay when things became real. And that's the cruel beauty of healing. You don't just heal for yourself. You become a mirror for others, a reflection they weren't ready to see. And while that may not bring the closure you thought you needed, it offers something deeper, liberation. Because now, even if he comes back, even if he's ready to give what he withheld before, you'll see it clearly. You'll feel it in your bones, that you no longer need it, that the love you were searching for has already begun to root inside of you. And that is the kind of power no one can take away. You are no longer the woman who needs to be chosen. You are the woman who chooses. And even if your heart softens when he speaks again, even if the memories still shimmer in your chest like old songs, it's different now. You have new standards, not the kind you recite, but the kind you embody, the way you pause before answering, the way you value your peace more than his potential, the way you recognize your own voice before absorbing his. That is what stays with him. Not the nights you cried, not the texts you sent, but the moment you stopped, the moment you shifted, the moment he felt you choose yourself. And that's what he can't let go of. Because when a woman reaches this level of self-understanding, when she truly returns to herself, she becomes untouchable, not in a distant way, but in a luminous one. Her energy no longer flows toward proving or pleasing. It radiates inward, feeding her own spirit first. She becomes magnetic, not because she tries, but because she glows in the absence of needing. And that's when everything changes. He may still circle back. He may still try to enter your life again. But now, you're not waiting at the door. You're tending your garden. You're pouring into your dreams. You're laughing without checking your phone. You're rising, not for him to notice, but because you finally believe you were meant to rise all along. That, my dear, is the final truth. You don't need to hurt anyone's ego to be remembered. You only need to stop feeding it with your fear. You only need to reclaim the parts of yourself you abandoned while trying to be enough. And when you do, not only will you stop chasing love, you'll become the kind of love that doesn't chase, that doesn't beg, that doesn't break itself to be understood. You'll become the kind of love that arrives and stays, even if no one else does.